watch MTV or listen to some of the popular radio stations, you might be familiar with the term hyphy.
I think it's the Bay Area's culture. It's Oakland's culture and it's the Bay Area's culture.
Hyphy is a lifestyle. It's the way we move, talk, walk.
And it's an energy that's around everyone, you know, that binds us.
Many agree Oakland sideshows are growing larger, more violent, and are scaring people.
If you were at the party and the song came on and we all going dumb, then we all going dumb.
Hyphy is an energy. Hyphy is a feeling. Hyphy is the impact grunge had, blues, and any other genre of music that was totally taking over the nation.
Hyphy music is a reflection of the people. So if you listen to a hyphy song, they might be talking about gangster stuff that happens in the streets, but it's just a reflection of what they seen yesterday or what they seen earlier that day, right?
With so much going on, man, we was losing friends, people was getting killed, people was dying.
It's definitely fire, that hyphy movement, that hyphy spirit that exists. So we're gonna rebel, we're gonna take over the streets, we're gonna commandeer the streets, and we don't care what they say. We're not just partying, but we're partying in spite of what you're trying to force us to do.
All of it is about liberation. It's about getting it out and celebrating it. And it's beautiful.
The ingredients and the residual impact will live forever.
It was a wild ass time.
It's hard to recreate because it was an era, it was a time, you know what I mean? It's a time capsule.
Hyphy is the act of being free. Hyphy is a movement.
Hyphy is a lifestyle.
Hyphy is powerful.
Academic. Tell me when to go. 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 Tell me when to go.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Q here with ProNerd, and I am so incredibly excited to bring you a brand new interview. Now, this one for all the music lovers out there, and I know that there's a lot of you. We nerd out on ProNerd about everything: movies, music, comics, games, woodworking, math, you name it, we nerd out about it. But today we're going to talk music and film, two of my favorite subject matters. And I am joined by the creative team behind We Were Hyphy, a brand new film all about the hyphy movement. Don't know what that is? Stay tuned to this and you're about to find out. I'm going to introduce here. We have Laurence Madrigal. Hello, how are you, sir? Director of We Were Hyphy.
Thanks for having us. Good, doing pretty well. Thanks, Q.
Absolutely. And we're also joined by producer Jason O'Mahony. Is that right?
That's close enough. Yeah, it's actually O'Mahony, but it's an Irish name, so it's very hard for people to say. But O'Mahony is close enough. Delighted.
You said it way better. I actually like it, so I'll just let you cue your name from now on. Does that sound all right?
Awesome.
Excellent. Well, gentlemen, I am so incredibly excited to talk about your film. I got to see it today, and there's so much to unpack here. Can you give the audience that's watching right now just a little idea of what the film is about, and then we'll dive in?
Yeah, sure. I can kick it off. So We Were Hyphy is a love letter to the Bay Area, specifically during a very important time in the San Francisco Bay Area, which is the hyphy movement, which started as a musical kind of movement, a subgenre of hip hop, if you will, known for its very like high tempo, very dance oriented, but heavy bass kind of sound, and also colorful, kind of wacky, crazy lyrics. So it started as music, and then it turned into an entire cultural kind of phenomenon that included slang, fashion, an entire car culture called sideshows, and this whole kind of like car kind of like way of expression. And then, of course, dancing, turf dancing, and going dumb, and that whole dance movement. And then with that, just kind of like a philosophy on life. And the film kind of explores the birth and what the impact it had of hyphy.
Yeah. for your listeners, it doesn't really matter if you're not familiar with hyphy is. Just to tell you a little bit about how the film kind of came about. I grew up in Ireland, and so hyphy was completely new to me. And Larry and I worked together, and he used to tell me stories about like when he was a teenager and like where he was growing up, and like all about hyphy music and sideshows and what it was like. And it just blew my mind because there were so many musical movements that kind of started in the Bay Area and in Oakland, and then kind of went out and kind of took over the rest of the world, whether it's the Beats back in the 50s or the hippies in the 60s, or sort of even disco in the 70s. And so listeners don't need to have, or don't need to be familiar with what hyphy is. We do like a good job of actually breaking it down. So even people who originally, like me, had no idea what it was about, kind of get a feeling for the whole movement.
I think that explanation is absolutely on point. I personally didn't know about hyphy going into the film. But after it, I almost feel like a hyphy aficionado now. Like now I understand. And you know, first off, for a doc about, on the surface level, a doc about music, it's about so much more. And that's what kind of struck me at first, is it's beyond just this music. Music is a way of life. It is it's kind of a lifeblood to this culture and this community. And so I have to ask, I know, Jason, you said that you didn't know a lot about it going into it. Laurence, what was your kind of like, were you listening to this music as it was happening? Did you come to it afterwards? How did that happen?
Yeah, totally. So I grew up in the San Francisco Bay Area, in the East Bay, in a town called Antioch. And around when I was going in high school and then going into my early 20s, that was like probably starting in like 2004, going into close to 2009. That's when hyphy was really big in the Bay Area. Not quite mainstream, but definitely in the Bay Area. And I was listening to it. I mean, just on the radio. I mean, back then it was like you had LimeWire in the radio, so we'd hear songs on the radio, and then we'd go home and download, or we'd buy CDs. Sometimes you catch people selling CDs out in the streets and at gas stations and stuff. That was a great way too. But yeah, I was just consumed by it. I was always a big hip hop head since I was even younger than that, like middle school. And I always kind of like dabbled in making beats as like a hobby on the side. So I was participating, trying to make hyphy beats, giving them to my friends who were aspiring rappers, and that's kind of how I got hooked on it. And then then beyond the music, we were just like, you're a high school kid in a town in the middle of nowhere. It's not the middle of nowhere, but there's not much going on. So you end up hanging out at gas stations. You might be doing donuts with your cars. You might be going to house parties, dancing to hyphy music. And you're just kind of like, it's just like what you do. And it just kind of like is such that time in your life is so, it molds you, so like that kind of, that energy and that confidence you get from whatever it is you're experiencing, whether it's hyphy or punk or EDM, that's kind of molds who you're going to be. So yeah, that was my experience with it, for sure.
I love that. And I connected to it as well. Like as I'm listening to this music, so I'm from the South originally, and in the South, I would say the counterpart is like crunk. And so immediately I was connecting. I was like, of course I dig this sound. This sound is similar to this sound. And, kind of that vibe and the whole feel. And like when people would, like you were saying, people were getting dumb and they were like just going crazy dancing to this music. And it's just so amazing to watch, and that whole like vibe that people give off when they're enjoying kind of this entertainment. I immediately connected with that.
I think that's one of the kind of things that we were trying to do. I think there's a wonderful universality. Like everybody's been a teenager. I grew up in the 90s and I was listening to sort of electronic dance music, or the Manchester scene in Ireland and England at the time. But it doesn't really matter what you're listening to, whether you're listening to classical music or to punk music. Like the friends that you make when you're like a teenager and those connections, there's just this wonderful universality to it. And that's what was so amazing about hyphy. When Larry was explaining it to me, I was like, yeah, there has to be more. It's got to be worth digging into, because everybody who was a teenager, who grew up, who had friends, who loved some kind of music, I think would be able to get something from the film.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. Now, obviously, you guys kind of have a cavalcade of people in the scene and of the scene, legends on the scene that you have, speaking throughout the film. As a fan, Laurence, growing up listening to this kind of stuff? Was it cool to like be having conversations with some of these people? Like when you guys were sitting down and you had Rick Rock on, I'm like, this is crazy. Like that dude is like, and you talk about it in the documentary, but that dude was that movement, like a huge part of that. What was that like?
Yeah, no, that's such a great question because it was mind blowing for me. Like it was these people that I just like wanted to be basically like worship, like especially Rick Rock, Mr. Fab, Droopy. And it was surreal meeting them. If I only make one movie in my life, I'm glad it was this movie because I got to meet all my heroes, and like
Sure.
Jason actually, not only is Jason like an amazing interviewer in general, but Jason conducted all the interviews. We'd formulate the questions together and I'd chime in, but I was just so starstruck I couldn't quite nail the interview like Jason would. So that was a great system we worked out. But and it's cool when you meet your heroes and they're so cool back and they're so nice and just like when we interviewed G-Eazy, he was so inviting and like hung out with us after the interview, and it was just like, yeah. And same with Kamaya, these huge celebrity musicians, they're just like, we're so humble and just like, just generous with their stories and their time and their voice. So it was a dream come true for me. Yeah.
That's awesome. And Jason, like to your point, kind of the universality of, this feeling of, experiencing this in teenage years, but this feeling of community and belonging with a group and other people who are things. That was kind of one of the things that really blew me away about the film in general, was that it doesn't feel alienating. I've seen documentaries where, it's a deep dive into a subculture, and even though you're watching it, you almost feel like you're at a zoo watching a caged animal. You know what I mean? Like, you're like, I don't relate to that. I don't know how to relate to that. But I think what you guys were very successful at was taking this movement and condensing it down to kind of its core roots, and then making it accessible to a wide audience and a wide community.
It's wonderful to hear you say that, because that's kind of what we were setting out to do. But to be honest with you, that's almost more thanks to the interviewees, because they were so generous with their time. And to tell you a little bit kind of about the backstory,
please.
Laurence and I first started chatting about this in June of 2018. So it's sort of like, it's been a long gestation. It's taken almost 4 years from when we first started talking about it to when the film is having its world premiere at Cinequest. But during that time, the film kind of grew from something that we felt would be cool to sort of make a 5 or 10 minute piece that might be on YouTube. Then, okay, this is going to be a 10 or 12 minute piece, and we'll be able to submit it to film festivals. And it actually grew into an 84-minute feature. But the reason is because everybody that we spoke to was like, oh my God, this is amazing that you're doing this. They were so welcoming to us. And then invariably, they'd be like, oh, and you have to speak to this person. And then they'd act as sort of like the conduit and connect us to the next person. And so the film kind of grew organically, but that feeling of sort of being invited into the scene and being part of the scene and like their generosity, that comes entirely from the people within the scene. Like one of the greatest parts of making it was, for me, because I'm really into cars, was like driving around with this guy called Falcon Dave, who's like the head of the Falcon Boys, and he drove us through Oakland on First Fridays. And like, he was just driving through Oakland and he was like beeping his horn at people and they were waving at him and he was waving at them, and we completely felt part of it, And so if we have captured that feeling, then 100%, as Larry was saying, it's thanks to the generosity and just the welcoming of everybody that we interviewed.
I love that. And I think that shows in the film as well. I think the film has a very warm feeling about it, from the interviewees to the way that it's presented. It feels very welcoming and inviting. And that seems to be what the hyphy community was all about, right? Like, they were all about trying to kind of raise up each other and support each other in this community, right? Like, people who may not have had that kind of widespread access to success or stardom, they were trying to grassroots it for their community.
Big time,
and
yeah.
I think that really came through in the film. I think it's a really great thing. I have to ask,
to sort of sugarcoat it, I mean, it was definitely tough times for the people there as well, but I think hyphy was kind of like a reaction to the tough things that were happening on the street. They certainly had, like, there's a wonderful quote from Kamaya, and she speaks about, like, as hyphy parties were going off, like, everybody was just like having a wonderful time, but then afterwards there could potentially be like bullets being fired on the street.
Yeah. Well, that was the thing too that caught me about the film was you have kind of these inspirational stories and you're hearing, you know, these people talking about things, and then it would be like just met with tragedy. You know what I mean? And then you have a community rallying around tragedy and rallying around, you know, these unthinkable situations, and then responding to it through their music and through their culture. You know, their culture would change and shift and morph with, you know, this kind of input from society around them. And that's fascinating to watch, and it's fascinating to hear. So well done. I'm excited. I'm glad that this film, you know, whether it had a long gestation period or not, I'm glad that people are going to get to see it. I'm excited. So if I understand correctly, it's going to be premiering through the digital counterpart of Cinequest, Cinejoy first. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's having its world premiere as part of Cinejoy. Tickets are available at the moment. There's a link on our website, which is wewerehyphy.com. We're also on our Instagram, which is just at We Were Hyphy. Tickets are available. They're only $3.99. And if you buy a ticket, you can watch the film anytime between April 1st and April 17th.
I love it. Absolutely fantastic. I appreciate both of you gentlemen joining me to talk about the film. I hope everybody goes and checks it out. Absolutely, absolutely. You must see this movie. You're a music lover, watch it. You're a film lover, watch it. You're a documentary lover, watch it. You're a community lover, watch it. Guys, I thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. Make sure you guys stay tuned to Project Nerd for coverage of all the amazing films coming your way. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't. Hit that like button, which is like here or over there or somewhere. It's around here. You guys know where it is. I can't see it, but you can. And we'll see you next time.